Hello, thanks very much for coming. Salam alaikum. My name is Peter Bale. I'm a frequent visitor to Dubai, and my old job is a colleague of Caroline's at CNN Arabic. So I know this town very well, and I'm very glad to be here. Wiki Tribune, it's me. So what I'm going to talk about today is a new project from Jimmy Wales, the founder of Wikipedia, and it's an attempt to create wiki journalism, which I'll describe to you. It's a revolution for us, it's a challenge for us, and I want to be very clear. One of the things about this is that it's a famous thing from Hollywood: no one knows anything. Very important that you don't get the impression that I'm trying to tell you that I know what I'm talking about here. We're running this is entirely a pilot from the ground up. Yes, it's everything I've ever known about journalism from working with Caroline and Reuters and various other places. But I don't want to give you the impression that we have all of the answers. Because as William Goldman, who was a Hollywood scriptwriter, said, no one knows anything, and we're really looking for the answers rather than believing that we have them. This is an early page, which in fact I did think twice. I did think twice about showing this today because, of course, it shows Mohammed bin Salman and some of the extraordinary events that have been going on in Saudi Arabia. One of the key elements that I want to show you, though, is that this piece here is by a community member, a guy called Jean-Jacques Soubrana. So this is by my staff journalists. We have about 12 staff journalists. Of course, this is by me. But most importantly, this is by a community member who happens to be a retired French diplomat based in Geneva. And he's using his experience and all of his knowledge as a diplomat to bring a unique perspective to this. There's no comment and there's no opinion, but he's using his experience as a diplomat to try and explain, in this case, what's going on in Saudi Arabia 3 or 4 months ago. And of course, it's very interesting because that is a community member. It's an ordinary member of the community. He is not a professional journalist, although he starts to write like it. So this is about the whole principle of this project, as you'll see shortly, is to put the members of the public, to put the community in the same status as the journalists. There's really no barrier between the two. And this is about the climate that we're in. I remember this particular quote coming across my desk at Reuters a long time ago. And it's still the case. You know, we're being disrupted. Every industry is being disrupted. Every advertising business is being disrupted. And WikiTribune is one of the answers to this, or one of the propositions to this. So if it's difficult enough for Rupert Murdoch to stay in the media business, then it's going to be difficult enough for us all. Somebody from Google was just saying before that they really thought only the UK and only the United States could sustain advertising-led businesses. And I think that's something we all need to think about. And of course, since all this happened, Rupert Murdoch has sold 21st Century Fox apart from Fox Television, to Disney. So if it's a challenge for him, imagine what it is for the rest of us. So we have a different business model. And of course, the problem in this climate is all about what we're seeing on the internet, the speed at which lies travel, the speed at which fake news travels. And one of the reasons Jimmy Wales founded this project was that morning when one of Donald Trump's spokespeople said, we have alternative facts. And that was really a trigger. You know, we all see appalling things every day. We see misinformation, we see the spread of disinformation, and then we also, particularly through Facebook and Twitter and so on, see the ability for people to post anything they like, for there to be no consideration about quality. And there will be several copyright images from the New Yorker here, because New Yorker cartoons always go across language boundaries. So this is what Jimmy's trying to do. It is, as he did with Wikipedia, it's trying to say the intelligence is out there, not here. The thought and the knowledge is out in the audience. Dan Gilmore, who's quite a well-known US professor of journalism, wrote a book at one point called We the Media. And it's all about this principle that the sources, that the true knowledge lives in the crowd, not in the journalists. It's a matter of going and digging it out. And of course, that's what's happened with Wikipedia. And it is very difficult, I can tell you as a journalist of some age, you can tell I'm old, but as a journalist of some experience, to hand over that power to the community is extremely difficult. And it's a very kind of unsettling thing to do, and we can discuss that in the questions if you like. I think also there's been a lot blurred. What is the blurring, as we've seen, particularly on phones, I believe, between commentary, opinion, and news. I think this is something we inherited from television, where it's extremely difficult to decide whether it is somebody's opinion or a piece of news that you're receiving. I think this has also been aggravated on the phone. So there is no opinion and there is no commentary on WikiTribune. It is an attempt to bring out facts. Of course, it is informed by who we are and where we are and our perspective, but it is a very clear attempt to be absolutely certain that it is facts that we're dealing with and news rather than people's opinions. And of course, this is about the velocity of untruth. This was an analysis, as you can see just from the headline, that the Oxford Internet Institute did of I think it was the last 300,000 tweets in the US 2016 elections, and it was essentially equal between misinformation and disinformation. And there's been plenty of these studies since then, which shows that misinformation, lies, travel faster than truth. Jonathan Swift, the writer of Gulliver's Travels, of course, had the famous line that a lie has gone around the world before the truth has got its boots on. Trust is really central to what we're doing. If the community doesn't trust us, then we have nothing. And we've tried to build the site very much against the trust principles which have come out from a US university, Santa Clara University in Silicon Valley, which has done the deepest analysis yet about what people trust. It's called the Trust Project. It's worth taking a look at. Everybody's trying to do this at the moment, but the transparency that we bring is very much from the community. They're constantly testing us, constantly questioning our wisdom, constantly questioning. I mean, at the moment, for example, we're getting, you're Russophobic. And then we're getting from the other side, you're too generous to Russia. So as with many stories, if you're somewhere in the middle and hated by both, you'll probably be doing an okay job. I had to really think about what this meant for me as a journalist, because I've been a journalist a long time. I've worked with people like Caroline at CNN. I've been at Reuters, News Corporation, Microsoft, and others. And to try and work out what this new wiki concept, what this concept of the Wikipedia way of working, where you're surrendering power to the audience, how does that come into journalism? And so I've had to reconsider for myself some of the very basic things about journalism and what journalism actually is. And so for me and my team, which is a very young team, this is a fantastic discipline to really think again about what we're trying to do. And for me, I came up with this idea for myself, and again, not that I know anything, but that journalism is the world observed and described from a vantage point. It isn't just a collection of facts. It is from the perspective that I have as someone of my age, my ethnicity, which is New Zealand, white New Zealand ethnicity, which is based on my life experiences. It has that perspective. Journalism also has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It is a story. It is not just a collection of facts. And that's a huge distinguishing characteristic between WikiTribune and Wikipedia. And also, journalism is inherently imperfect. Journalism is partly, and this is why many journalists are alcoholics, is partly the desperate attempt to get things right and the constant failure to get things right. It is this incredible sine wave of getting it right, getting it wrong, getting it right, getting it wrong, getting it published, not getting it published. And it is imperfect at the moment of creation. And if you accept that, you can go a little bit easier on yourselves. I imagine some of you may have seen the new Spielberg film, The Post, about the Pentagon Papers at the Washington Post. The former publisher of the Washington Post, who died, handing over to Katharine Graham, came up with the very famous concept of journalism or news being the first draft of history. And this, again, is very important when you're comparing us with a factual service like Wikipedia. We are not historians. We are not going to be perfect at the right time at this time. We can do the best we can with the facts we have available and what we can see and observe at that moment. But a historian has perfect 20/20 vision. So this is one of the things that I think we've got to get across to the audience as well, and it's in part of trust, is if you get it wrong, you have to fix it. If it's inaccurate, you have to fix it. But there also has to be an understanding that news is moving at a tremendous rate and speed, and it will not be perfect at any given moment. I often think about this because there's a rather wonderful book, The Imperfectionists by Tom Brackman, which is a novel, but is really, in fact, a work of non-fiction formerly about the International Herald Tribune. And Caroline and I know several people who are featured in here. This is all about this desperate attempt to get it right and then never quite making it. So they're all kind of sad characters like me. So at WikiTribune, I have a team of 6 very young staff journalists and another 6 freelancers who work around the world with me. And what I had to do was come up with a system because they were so inexperienced, a new system of trying to do this, everything we're doing systematically, almost by rote. And so what we've come up with is a checklist, which I'll show you in a moment. And it's the kind of stories we go for are complex. They're not good and evil. They're not good guys, bad guys. They're not earthquakes, and they're not celebrities. They're complex stories, the kind of stories that require a little bit of understanding, such as what's been going on in Saudi Arabia, for example. Or the Qatar story at the moment. I think the Qatar story is an absolutely brilliant story for us because it is so complex and has so many points of view, and we can try and report those very, very fairly. It has to be internationally relevant, and it has to last more than one news cycle. One of the most interesting things that's happened so far, and again, it's all a pilot, is our articles, our stories are lasting 1, 2, 3 weeks, even several months. Our story on the Me Too movement and Harvey Weinstein lasted really about 4 months and was constantly updated almost every day. So it became more like an artifact, more like an encyclopedic test of history, because you can go back into it and see every change, every comma, every spelling mistake, every correction, and every moment of that story is recorded in the information that comes along with that story and is available to any reader. So one of the ways in which I've done this is to try and be systematic. If you don't know Atul Gawande, he's an orthopedic surgeon who also writes beautiful books and beautiful pieces for the New Yorker. A couple of years ago, he did a book called The Checklist Manifesto, which is now used by the World Health Organization and the National Health Service in England and probably in Dubai. And it's about a systematic approach to everything. It's why doctors no longer leave scalpels in people's tummies when they're doing operations. It's all about having a system. And so I've tried to apply this to journalism. It's a very systematic approach. So every morning or every day, my team, when they think about a story, is this story worth covering? Can I bring some attention? If they don't get, I don't mean to make this too much paint by numbers, but if you're 12 and you've just come out of journalism school, you can decide on to yourself, is this story a WikiTribune story? Is it worth me spending our valuable time and energy on it? And you can see it has to be international. Are there facts to support what I'm doing? Is the story likely to last a long time? And then how will we do it? Does it just go into our daily briefing, which is almost a daily briefing is a list of probably the top 7 to 10 stories in the world at any given time. But if we can't do it ourselves really well, we will just link out to Reuters and the AP and Agence France Presse and the BBC. And we have a very strict list of who we will link to and how we will explain who that link is going to and why. Is it an emerging story? Is it something we'll do a quick break on and then enlarge it? And this is actually one of the other beautiful things about our system so far for me, is that we can start with 1 or 2 paragraphs. Wikipedia has a thing called a stub, which is just one line, which might say, Sheikh Mohammed is the ruler of Dubai. But what we will have is event, source, and context, and we call that a news stub. And so that fits into the emerging thing, and it could become a 3,000 or 5,000 word story eventually. But it starts small and then builds on itself, which is actually the way news works at a newsroom. It's just we're doing it all in the open. The open stuff is quite terrifying, as you'll see in a moment. And then we use analytics to try and make sure that this is working. This is still very much a work in progress. This is a wonderful Serbian product actually called Content Insights, which I thoroughly recommend to anybody who's running a newsroom which is based on journalism, because this is fantastic for working out whether the stories you're doing are actually worthwhile. It isn't just about clicks. It's about things like, for example, economy. So where am I? 5%. In the time that this was done, I've written 5% of the articles, but they've had 8% of the page views. Whoopee. So that means I'm an economical person. There's somebody here who's done, what is it? So George has had 14% of the page views on the site, but he's written 10% of the work. So his work is particularly economical, you see. The bright green, so Jimmy hasn't written anything, but he's had one story which keeps getting 3% of traffic. So you can work out both by author and by subject what's the most economic, what's the most effective work to do. It doesn't mean that you don't do important stories that don't get read very much, but it does allow you to accelerate and put more emphasis into the ones that do get read and that are important. It allows you to make a judgment. And so this whole thing is really based on based on judgment. And obviously, if we're not running any advertising, so that's why we can run stories that don't get read to some extent, but we have to think about how we're devoting our resources to it. And a lot of this is about users as well. And so Jimmy has this very naive in a way, but very, very passionate belief in the goodness of the crowd. And the point of this is Jimmy believes that if you give people power, they will use it appropriately, that people of goodwill will come together and create great things. Of course, he's seen that with Wikipedia. I'm much more nervous about that. So I'm trying to do it from a journalistic point of view and force it back to some of these basic journalism things that we all pretend to adhere to, but these are the driving forces behind what we're trying to do. This is what we don't do. Disasters, plane crashes follow, apart from MH17 and the one that was shot down in Ukraine, I would say most plane crashes, most earthquakes follow a standard pattern. We can't really add any good value to that. CNN, Reuters are much, much better at that, so we won't do them. Celebrities, we will not be covering the Meghan Markle, Prince Harry wedding, unless it contributes something to one of our goals. And the staff journalism is there to cause a conversation with the community, to provoke action. It doesn't matter to us whether the community posts a comma, posts anything at all. It can be a 3,000-word story, or it can be changing an Oxford comma. It really doesn't matter as long as they're engaged. Of course, this is always the dilemma with opening up the sausage machine, is you can see absolutely everything there. The key is we don't want to make it boring. This is what we've got at the moment. We started with 1,500 unique users, 1,500 registered community members in October, and we now have 8,500. Only a relatively small number of them contribute every day, but we would like it to, obviously that's the objective, is to get to a kind of 50-50 ratio between content from staff journalists and the community. This is possibly one of my favorite pictures of all time, which is Tim Berners-Lee sending a tweet during the 2012 London Olympics, which is to say, this is for everyone, which was just this extraordinary gesture about from the man who'd invented the World Wide Web. And essentially, the message is the same for WikiTribune. I'd love you to register. You can register with your Facebook. You don't even have to register to see the back into the sausage machine. You can see every draft, every copy of every story. But please do register if you wish. And now I have a really gratuitous plug, because I'm also the president of the Global Editors Network, and we're having our conference in Lisbon at the end of May, and we'd love you to come. Thank you very much. I'll take any questions.